Start us off. What's your vision? What should we be doing?
Okay. First of all, it's so great to see so many people interested in the topic. As someone who's working in the field of civics, you sometimes feel like you're waving your arms from mountaintops and building tops, so I'm glad that you all get it and we're here to talk about what more we can do collectively. I guess I come at this from three different perspectives. A recovering politician, somebody who's engaged in programmatic delivery now, and somebody who, as you heard, spent a lot of time in divisive societies, right, in the Middle East and the UN. And when I think about the first one, what does it mean when you're an elected official in an area and with people who are civically minded and civically engaged? It's clear to me, and Brendan, who was in the district and we helped me out with campaigns and other things, you're probably trying to say politically neutral, sorry to throw you under the bus. But there's a clear difference when you know that you're in a room of folks who are thoughtful, who understand the issues, they understand how government works. It helps to keep elected officials to account, right? So this is I guess I'm talking about the outcomes, but it's part of my vision. Democracy requires our participation. How do you prepare people for participation in democracy? Civic education. The other part that I think, and this is maybe shifting to my current role of implementing civic education programs, is how do you make people feel like they belong in a civic space? And it's our experience at the Institute, which, by the way, a soft pitch here, has an exact 1-to-1 scale of the United States Senate over in Columbia Point in Dorchester next to the JFK Library. And it's just, when it comes to learning civics, to watch, the first program I saw when I came in there 2.5 years ago was 4th graders debating immigration policy, and my jaw dropped. Because these are 4th graders who were standing up confidently at their desk and saying, "Mr. President, this provision is too onerous," and like, what is happening here? And there was something about the space, it's something about the kind of the programs and how you can set up where the dialogue is and what's next, and anyway, so that's, but my point is also those 4th graders felt like, I belong in government, I should be debating these things, I have something to say, and you can imagine that extends, it goes up through the college level of the programs, and so there's something about feeling like you belong, feeling like you know what's happening, feeling like you can participate in meaningful ways, and that'll get to what I want to keep about the message. But I did want to, before I get there, you're going to give me a warning at some point.
Yes, it's going to be beautiful.
Beautiful, yeah, a big beautiful warning. I'm gonna, so the UN work was, how do you operate in a space where we're seeing, trying to develop a democracy in those instances, in a divided society, in a moment when, media has fragmented. I'm not even describing the US right now, but it sounds like I am, right? I'm talking about a civil war situation in Iraq. And you have the inability or the difficult ability to differentiate what you're reading and what you're seeing, and giving those skills in a divided society, in a democracy that's facing a lot of challenges. To me, that's another element that I'm focused on these days. In part because the other thing the Institute does, and that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight, is we bring senators together, former senators, to talk about how we're going to make sure the nation's divisions do not undermine our governing institutions, or at least minimize the extent to which they are. And so there's a real connection, so 1 minute. So I better scoot over here to what you keep. I'm going to stick with the keep. So one of my first bills that I voted on was the 2018 Civic Education bill in Massachusetts when I became a state senator from out here. And I'm proud of it. I talk about it all the time. The fact that we allocate money for projects, for hands-on engagement. It's part of what we're doing now is that those kids standing up in the class, in the chamber, when you're role-playing, when you're experiencing, it's far more memorable. And so to build that into the law, to build that into the work that We the People is doing, and a lot of you in this room, we know it's meaningful. And so let's double down on the stuff that we know is working.
Thank you so much. And remind everybody, you do have a 3x5 card
that you can write a question on that when all the panelists, when it's all over, that we'll be passing to the ends, to Katie and to others. So if something comes to mind and you're like, what is that? What was that 2018? And you want to write that down, feel free to put it onto your web record. Thanks. Great, Ruben.
Yeah, so I think around like the question of vision, like maybe I have been in my role at DESE for too long and I've just like drunk the Kool-Aid, but I like flipped this paper over. And the sentence at the top from our frameworks like feels pretty accurate with how I would answer that question in the elevator pitch. So like the purpose of civic education, or the vision of civic education, being to prepare all students to be thoughtful and active citizens with the knowledge, skills, and competencies to be informed and effective participants. Like that feels like big picture of the vision. And then like, what does that mean? What does that mean that students are walking away from their school experience with? I kind of think about that in two buckets. Understanding the world that they live in and being empowered to take action to shape that world. So to sort of speak about each of those in turn, I think both of those are really important. So around understanding of the world, like part of that is that students across the state, like no matter their district, their school, their background, their identity, like they have knowledge of civics, of government, of history, of geography to understand the world that they live in today. I was thinking as like about, all these stories about tariffs and just like how much history and civics and economic density is in any news story about tariffs. Like the power of the executive branch, foreign policy, like the 1920s and like the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. And I was like, that was something I learned about back in my high school history class. Like I didn't think that would be relevant. To like, of course, economic concepts, things like trade deficits, how does taxation work, what is progressive versus regressive taxes. And like these are all over the place in the news, and students need to have that knowledge of the past, of other societies across disciplines to really be able to break any issue down and like develop a really informed stance on it. I think this also includes knowledge of like the full scope of history, the diversity of perspectives and life experiences, the times when liberty has been expanded, the times it's been contracted, so that students can really understand both like the potential of democracy and the times that it has not lived up to that potential, and learned about what have we done in those moments, what have individuals done to take action in pursuit of increased justice for all people. And again, it's a place we can really learn from both the past and from other societies. Alongside that knowledge are skills, the skills of like doing social studies, of doing history, of doing civics. These are things like asking questions, critically analyzing sources, the kind of intellectual skills of like how do you break down and understand an issue and take action on an issue. Some other important skills that I feel very important are like media literacy, especially right now. Like the landscape of information, misinformation, disinformation is always changing, always evolving. And how do we make sure that students know how to navigate that? The habit of seeking out multiple perspectives, knowing how to find multiple perspectives, how to find accurate information, and the ability to like take an issue or a problem that they see and really break it down, understand things like the root cause, like what leads to this thing that I'm seeing around me, what are the systems and structures and people who are involved in that, so that I can really understand it and then think about taking action on it. This is a place that we see students really struggle, but I think is really key to systems level change. So I put like all of that in this first bucket of like understanding the world. And then the other really important piece is being empowered to shape that world. So again, there's like a knowledge component, right? How does government work? How does like in this moment today, who is making decisions? Who's my state senator? Who's my state rep? What level of government do I go to take action on a certain thing? When do I go somewhere that's not government, to some other organization or individual who has decision-making power? Who makes decisions? Where are the places for influence on those decisions? Really tightly bound up with that is another set of skills around navigating those systems, making arguments that are going to be compelling to different individuals, communicating with elected officials, sort of thinking through making a strategic plan. And then I would add like this last piece around mindsets or dispositions. It's not quite skills, it's not quite knowledge, but it's the things that you need to believe as you go out into a diverse and pluralistic society. Part of that is a sense of agency, right? Like how do you get every kid to feel like that fourth grade student that like, this is a place I belong, this is a place where my voice matters, like I can speak these arguments just like anyone else in society. I feel empowered to do that. If I see something wrong, I can make that change. Belief in values like equality, like liberty, respect for diverse viewpoints, and belief in the value of democracy itself, In like a recent survey, like basically a quarter of young Americans believe that democracy is like the best system of government. And I think there's like a mindset piece there. Like, how do you have to believe that there's something in the system that can work and that you can help make work better? And that's maybe my big picture of it.
So, thank you so much, Ruben.
Hey, hi. So I'm going to just go at this with my vision is one that includes some core concepts for all of our students, K-12. I'm a teacher educator, so I'm thinking about the kindergartners all the way through the seniors, beginning with action. And what I want to stop is having people tell kids that they're going to have some useful information and skills that they can apply when they're graduated. What we want to say is you can do it now. You are living in the real world. IRL is now with us, with adults. And so that's a big piece, is where that agency and that action begins in kindergarten and takes us through life. Community is another piece that I think is really critically important for our young people. Everybody wants to have a sense of joy and belonging, and I think one of the challenges that we have currently in our society is that people are losing some of that sense. They don't know where they belong, they're not sure where their community is, they don't know how to find one. It's a little bit strange when you think about the digital access we have to communities, and in some ways that's really tremendous, right? You can find people who you can connect with that you might not have been able to find. But that face-to-face community, that idea that I can talk to my neighbor, and my neighbor might be different than me, and how can I connect with them still, that we're still in a community, is a piece that I want us to be working on. Another is to envision and to imagine what the future is. So at our school in Amherst, we talk to the students about what kind of world do you want to live in, and what actions can you take to see it happen. But the first step before the action is to be able to envision. So really exposing young people to a wide variety of cultures, of perspectives, of times and spaces today and in the past, so that they can think about what do they want to bring into the space of their world that they're envisioning. They need to begin, they kind of can't imagine if they don't have that foundation of knowledge. So looking at that. A critical lens is really important. Ruben already talked about root cause. It's one of the most amazing parts of the Massachusetts civics curriculum and the civic action projects, is that it goes to root cause, which is transformative. So we have so much to be proud of with just that element that we do, because if you don't look at the root cause, you're Band-Aids. And that's a big thing for me that changed throughout my career. I really began in service and community service learning, and that has a place and it's important. But when you really want to do transformation, you've got to look at that root cause. And so then we're moving into that civic action. Another piece that I think is really critical for our students, we already heard from folks, I'm going third. Let's see how Kelly does. But that media literacy skills, that research, the foundations of our field in social studies, but really, understanding what is truth. But I want to just speak to something that was really interesting to me when I started teaching civics, is I had to look at just the accessibility of information, not talking about is this a credible source, but I have to pay my taxes, it's tax day, everybody. How hard is that to do? How do we make the ways that we interact with our government accessible? If you try to go, if you're a student and you're wanting to do something about, something maybe with town zoning and the environment, and you have to go to a town website, and now you've got to navigate this website that was probably really underfunded and probably not very easy to navigate, and maybe doesn't have all the information you need, and now you've got to figure it out. That I did not understand fully until I started teaching students how to do it. Even though I was engaging with the world as an adult in those ways, it is hard. And so just information accessibility is a piece that we need to do. I knew I was going to get a yellow card. I don't think anybody else got yellow cards.
They did.
Oh, you did? Okay, sorry. I was just enraptured by what you were saying. Okay. Perseverance is something that I really want to speak to. When we think about the long trajectory of action, sometimes it can be defeating to say, oh, I wanted to get this bill passed, or I want to do this thing, and knowing how long it takes. Recognizing that we're part of a larger landscape, and students often will think about an issue like racism, and it's been happening for hundreds of years, and we're a part of a larger system, so we can link ourselves into that. Voice, critically important. I think it's important for us to amplify our student voices. And then allies is a piece that I want to just say. Teaching students how to find people. They might be allies on some issues, but not others. And that's actually good, right? And so find your allies who you can work with, and recognize that life is not binary, and we need to look to what unites us and not divides us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. Kelly?
Good evening, folks. For those of you who maybe came in later, my name is Kelly Brown, and I am a government and history teacher at East Hampton High School. And truthfully, I sat here so I didn't have to go first. But what I noticed is this is a lovely evolution from sort of broadness to narrow. And so I'm actually going to talk about my own classroom as a lens, I think, for some of the things that I think are important for civic education. So as was mentioned earlier, I teach the We the People program, which is a national program from the Center for Civic Education that sort of fell into my lap and I've come to love, and it has absolutely transformed my life. And the things that are a part of that are the things that I think are important for civic education. So the first is a rigorous scope and sequence of our constitutional and government history. I think it is absolutely important for students to understand from the philosophical foundations of our country through modern application and being able to dig deeply in an authentic way that isn't just a quick traverse over our institutions is really incredibly important. I think students need to focus on that in a complex way. And in the We the People program, we focus on complex inquiry questions that actually have students dig deeply, whether it's into a philosophical foundation of our country to something modern like immigration policy today, that students have the opportunity to actually dig and look at things from multiple perspectives and read primary sources and read the executive orders that are coming out and really engage deeply and complexly so that it is not a quick answer to something that is incredibly complex. Something that is incredibly important in my classroom, and I think something we have to really help students learn, is civil discourse. How to engage with someone with whom we disagree without having that automatically lead to dislike or dehumanization. And that's challenging because we don't have great models for that in society today. And so helping students think about things from multiple perspectives. There's a quote that's often attributed to Aristotle, which he didn't say, but it goes something like, the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain an idea without accepting it. And so that's sort of a ethos to our classroom, which is to be able to think about things. Just because you understand where someone comes from doesn't mean you have to agree with it, doesn't mean it justifies it, but really thinking about why it's important to think about things from multiple perspectives. A fourth piece is understanding, this is something that Ruben talked about, our institutions as part of the solution. Some of the most compelling historical stories, I'm also a history teacher, are those in which people are operating outside of our institutions. But when you closely examine the change that's created in history, there is collaboration with institutions. So what is the role for activism? What is the role for institutions? What are the roles for collaboration in those places? And having students look at those things in a complex way and helping them understand their access point. This is another thing that Ruben mentioned, which is, where do I go when I want to create change? Where is the place for stepping outside of the institutions, and where is the place for stepping within? A really important part of my classroom is inviting people in and helping students build social capital. So how do I bring in adults? How do we have intergenerational conversations about issues of our government, our community? We just finished our National We the People competition, and now we're going to do a book group. We're going to read Jeffrey Rosen's Pursuit of Happiness together with some folks from our community. Last year we did that with our retirement community in East Hampton, and this is something that we're going to continue to do to really build that social capital. How do we talk about things across generations? How do we solve things? And I'm going to end with a positive trend. I think everyone is realizing we need civic education. We may not agree, but I think that's a good start. And it's a bit amorphous right now, but I think we can all agree that more is necessary. And John Adams said that self-government is necessary for self-government. And I think that's a really important lens to think about with civic education. And one thing I would add, something I find fascinating is kind of the consideration of virtue, civic virtue and individual virtue that the founding generation, across the generation, so not just framers, found to be incredibly important. It's something we emphasize in our classroom. And it's something that I think we could actually bring us together as a country in thinking about civic education. So I'd love to talk more afterwards with anybody about that.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Actually, that's a good thing to say, to remind folks and just let you know that when we do wrap up after the panels, and you have a half sheet of paper where you can write down some information that we'll put on the wall, but then we'll all be hanging out in the hall and we can interact with any of the panelists after this. So, okay. Brendan, could you move the next one? Great. So now we're moving to the right-hand side of the stage, and the time is a little different because there's more of you, and there's also this sort of additional question here. Since they've just been listening to these folks speak, that they're going to share their vision, what you'd like to see, and also there might be something you might want to respond to, or a question that does not need to get answered, but a question you might just be putting out there, which you can do. Okay. Quine, are we going to go in order, we think?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
So, like, initially I had already been planning to talk about, like, my high school education, just what civics look like for me in high school. And then, interestingly enough, every point that was made related to that. So, I went to Holyoke High School. At Holyoke High School and in Holyoke Public School District, we have this thing called ethnic studies, which is literally every point that was made. Media literacy, critical thinking, action, and most importantly, I have this underlined 3 times, agency. There's no other classroom that I've been in that made me feel like I had a voice, that I belonged, like an ethnic studies classroom. That was very powerful, but yes, ethnic studies, yeah. So when I think about civics, and when I think about this thing called civics, haven't really spoke about that term specifically a lot in my schooling, but the most, like, I think I can connect it to the most is ethnic studies. And for me, that's my vision of civic education, is critical thinking, action. So something I did in my ethnic studies classroom was think about how can I serve as a member of my community while also being in high school? What can I do? And how can I use my voice within my community? So in my introduction, they said I helped build an archive for the Holyoke Ethnic Studies program. So all the work that the Holyoke Ethnic Studies program has done is archived. It's saved forever, it's digital. And I had a hand in creating that. So that's one way that, like, that agency and that action has shown up outside of the classroom, as well as, I'm trying to think, what else did ethnic studies do for me? Well, a little connection path to ethnic studies in college is the Center for Racial Justice. I'm an apprentice there now. We also have some youth board members. Center for Racial Justice is a center here in the College of Education. The youth board is a group of high school students who come every Friday during the school year and talk about how they can show up as members of the community and what social justice looks like for them as young people. And that's kind of like a connector. So throughout ethnic studies, I found the CRJ, and I know people from ethnic studies who are currently in high school who are in CRJ as well. And the thing I want to start, I guess, because I don't necessarily know what civics looks like for other people or other schools in Massachusetts, but I'd like to start is really emphasizing belonging in classrooms. Really emphasizing belonging, because I feel like, and there was a percentage here, you're probably not gonna find it, it was 44% of people who did not recall having experiences of belonging didn't vote. I'm pretty sure, young people. I'm pretty sure that's what the percentage means. But there's clear signs of that, those percentages mean something, and that means something. So really emphasizing belonging in classrooms is important to me. I'd also say critical thinking as well. Really, most importantly to me is community engagement and intergenerational conversation. I really appreciated that because the most powerful conversations I had in my ethnic classrooms were with people from the community, like Holyoke historians like Maria Cartagena, people who really like inspired me and who really have shown up, and who are historians in my community coming to classrooms and speaking with us, really showed me that like it's not just on this like global scale or this country scale, like it's really can be at your level, your city level, county level, and yes, I'm gonna pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cleme. Awesome.
Hello. Sorry, I'm trying to reread everything I wrote down. I guess my vision for civics education in Massachusetts, coming from someone who took civics last year as a junior, where I go to school, Pioneer Valley Performing Arts, it's a requirement for a semester to have civics education. And I guess now is kind of like for civics education for maybe each election or each big change in the political climate is to kind of update it. Probably not the best word, but like the political climate and our laws keep changing so quickly, and things now are changing so quickly that I feel like what we were taught before may not always apply now, and may not always apply in the future. Like changes to our rights and attacks on certain people's rights, like people should be taught about that as it's changing, instead of being kind of stuck in the old mindset, or being taught old things that don't apply to now, so it's not very helpful. What I'm gonna keep or start, I was taught this, I don't know if this is at every school, but my civics teacher, we kind of talked about our rights with the police, which I found very helpful as a Black person in this country. And I think that was the first time in my life that I was taught in school about my rights with the police. And I think it should just be implemented in civics curriculum. Like it shouldn't be like oh, I can't teach you this, or I don't have to teach you this sort of thing. Like it's very important, I think, for people to know their rights with law enforcement. And the questions over there or what? Sure. Kind of circling back to my first point, as educators, how would you prepare your students whose civic and civil rights are under fire? Like, how would you teach them now, as the laws in this country keep changing?
So good. So good. So good. Thank you so much, Rex. Tashana.
Hello, I'm Tashana. I guess I'll start with the first question. What's my vision for civic education? In my school, we've had some pushback with like the emergence of certain political groups. Like we have a Justice for Palestine club in our school. We have Black Student Union. We have Feminist club and stuff like that. And civic education, I don't have a civics course at my school, but we are required to take 2 U.S. history classes and I think an additional class for that. And in my U.S. history class, I learned enough, but I feel like I didn't learn as much as I needed to, especially as a person of color in America, because it's like, you really should know your rights and basis of civics as a person of color in America, considering our political climate right now. I want to touch on that a little bit. My school is not at NHS, Northampton High School. I go to Northampton High School. We're not a very political school, but the student body is very political, and whenever there's like like a political thing in the media and stuff like that, we always speak up about it because the school is very prone to not speak about it. And we do walkouts, we do meetings, we do this and we do that. And I think compared to certain communities, a lot of the time we don't see that in other schools than, predominantly white institutions. And Kwame was talking about ethnic studies. I was super excited to do ethnic studies, but at my school it got dropped. And along with that, Black history got dropped too. And I think stuff like that in schools, it's very telling because I've always thought a cultural course should be mandatory because we're not learning the type of things in school that most kids wouldn't know as just going on their day-to-day life. And so school is it's a formative time in your age growing up and stuff like that, and you learn a lot of stuff from school, social settings and stuff like that as well. And I don't think we're putting enough emphasis on the social aspect rather than the curriculums in school and stuff like that, because you learn stuff you won't learn in social settings. So what I would like to change or start would be to put more emphasis on our student body rather than pushing out this narrative that the adults in our schools should be able to disdain? I don't know, should control the way that we're funneling out the political climate to these kids and stuff like that. I think we should be able to have the students have more autonomy over their political climate and what they're getting in their schools. You got a question?
You got a question? You still have time? You don't? Okay, great. Thank you, Tashana.
Hi everybody, I'm Luke Salvador. First, I really want to thank all you guys for all the amazing approaches and comments that you made. And so, because of that, I think a lot of ground has gotten covered on very important things today. And so I want to maybe take this time for, sort of a different approach. And one that I think everyone has talked about a little bit, but doesn't necessarily relate to civic education. So one thing that I see that everyone's talking about is that the student needs to be empowered. The student has to have, control, as you say, of their own destiny. And I think a lot of that is missing in, America today, with students just having the lack of willingness to, in general. The lack of willingness to do X. Whatever it tends to be, they just sort of don't. And, one amazing thing that you said was that self-government, to self-govern, you have to self-govern. And so to be able to make an impact in the community, I really believe the student first has to have discipline of themselves, and they have to have a willingness to participate. And I think that's something that doesn't necessarily relate to civic education, yet needs to start being more of a mindset for DESE in general, as, these students, if they are going to go make an impact, the first thing they have to be is a leader. And, a lot of that comes back to the lack of willingness to, which, as you had mentioned, there's a lot, Dr. Deloche, you had mentioned, there's a lot of community struggles, a lot of mental health issues, and that's part of why, I developed Me in 30, and, as I mentioned, or as Jackie had mentioned, it's a self-betterment program for students with mental health, and I really think tackling that problem is something that we can do alongside all the supplementation of, civics. And you had mentioned the fourth grader, talking, but Mr. President, I really thought that was cool. And I think we can certainly supplement that, but as much as all the students need to be powered in civics, imagine trying to learn about civics or try to think that you can make an impact if you're not confident with who you are and what you can do. So I think that is kind of a way that, maybe the approach needs to start getting shifted around that. And not that all of this can't happen at the exact same time, but it just needs to sort of be, realigned with what is the root cause, and what is really dragging them and prohibiting them from being that best version of themselves or being that most active citizen that they can. Now, to keep, I really had a good time doing the PEA. I'm a senior at Coppin High School, and that's a graduation requirement for us. I'm not sure if that's a state thing, but we had to do the PEA. And I absolutely loved it. I was able to do social media's impact on students' mental health, and that was my political engagement activity. I really had a good time with that. I honestly think that could happen sooner. For something to change, in order just for the student to be able to do it again, or have maybe an even deeper experience with the public, and doing the interviews and conducting real life conversations with, I talked to a state senator, and that was just such a good experience to be able to talk to someone that has real insight of how things are working, what's not working specifically, and what someone like me can go do and have an impact outside of a conversation. And I still think it comes back around to us needing to have leadership skills, and I think that all comes back to being able to make an impact in civic education.
Luke, what's PEA?
Oh, political engagement activity.
Thank you. Yes, great. Thank you, Luke. Oliver.
Good evening, Mulder Borowski. I'll say I'm not incredibly well versed in education policy, so I can only speak from my own experience. But from everything I've learned in my civic education, government is complex. If we had a simple government, it wouldn't work. And when you face these questions about government and think deeply, rarely do you find clear answers, and that's frustrating. Civic education courses can be remarkably frustrating, and there needs to be a motivation to be focused and to learn what you're learning. And for most classes, the motivation is great. The reason that students are pushed to learn is because they want to get a good grade. But I think for civic education, the motivation has to be beyond that, because you can't have students learning crucial things about the government, which affects their lives so greatly, and then walk out the door and forget it. And the most valuable thing I got out of this year with Ms. Brown's We the People program was that motivation. It was the first course in which it was acknowledged that civic education is in and of itself a check on governance. And that I feel like a little bit of like I'm reading off like a student counselor poster when I say like knowledge is power or something, but I think it's even more important to say that a lack of knowledge and a lack of education about your government is a detriment, it's a harm to you. And by learning these things, you're granted the power to witness when you're being robbed of what you deserve. And I think that motivation is something that students would be far more appreciative than I think many people assume. If I'd been told, like, we're giving you power by teaching you these things, I think I would have been more attentive in 8th grade. I think that's so important of like, the reason why someone like John Adams valued civic education as an important step in having self-government is because an educated citizen body is the only way that we can have democracy. And we can see throughout history that the limitation of education is a tool for limiting people's political power. And students need to be aware of the fact that what they're getting is not just another course, but it's something that is valuable in how they're going to live the rest of their lives, and something that is a tool and something they're entitled to. And it's for you, it's not just for your report card. And as well as of that element of how hard learning these things can be, that's why I feel like a classic Miss Brown student here. I'm going to talk more about virtue, but it's so true that learning how to learn is just as important as learning the material itself. And that's part of this whole area of thinking of the fact that part of civic education is not just learning the outside, it's not just learning government and history, it's also learning how you yourself can lead your life and how you can advocate for yourself and live in a certain way that will allow you to get as much as you can, learn as much as you can, exercise the power you have in our society, and not feel like it's hopeless, not feel like you have no routes, because they're there. And that needs to be the focus of education.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Thank you all. So we did want to give a chance for the left side of the panel from this to have just a chance to respond to what they heard you say. So you don't have to take this time to do this, but if any of you would like up to 2 minutes to say something in response or something you wanted to add or something you heard, you wanted to build on or a question you were asked, because there were a couple questions asked, you can do that. Is there any folks, Adam, Ruben, Irene, or Kelly? Okay?
I'm pretty certain that we all just want to say thank you.
No.
And really prove our point, because young people are doing it. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that. What was the question that you asked, and
How to prepare students whose civic and civil rights are under fire? Like, how do you prepare them for the changing world that we live in as an educator?
So again, I can speak from my own specific experience in my own class, and one of the things that's been really wonderful about this program that Olive and I have been a part of is really connecting with people out in the world doing this work, and doing the work around rights and constitutional work and institutional work. So one of the things that I always say to my students is I don't always know the avenue to help you in a situation, but what we do is we reach out to folks to guide us in this. So I immediately thought of a person who's become a friend of mine who is a constitutional scholar who does actually bring cases and argues to defend students' rights, to defend people's rights all across the country. And I always make sure to bring him in to the classroom via Zoom or something like that to talk about these actual cases. So we may be studying the First or Fourth or Eighth Amendments, but always like bringing someone in to say, like, this is what it actually looks like right this second for students or for adults, but actual rights. And I think on the one hand, that shows that the law and the Constitution are happening right now, but the other thing it does, which I think you all kind of touched on, is it lets us understand that it's like real people doing these jobs. Right? So this person might be a constitutional scholar who's argued in front of the Supreme Court, but he's sitting in a t-shirt Zooming with us from Tennessee, saying, here's what it looks like for me and here's an argument I'm working on right now. And so for me, as much as it may be something very specific, like you said, here are your constitutional rights with the police, I think that's incredibly important. And then also seeing that regular people can help you if you ever get into a situation, or if we get into a situation, or we can look at situations that people are in and say, what actually happens? Like, how do you file a lawsuit? What are the steps that are actually involved? And then letting them know that they could reach out to real people to answer these questions. To me, that's the most important thing, is it's not out there, it's right here. And I think that's kind of what you said.
Thank you so much, Kelly. The other people on the panel? Yes.
Yeah, just to build on that, like, I think that one phrase that I heard that I think guides me in that is the idea of both navigating and transforming society. And I think that we need to equip students to do both of those things, right? Like, all students, I think especially students whose their rights to themselves are under threat, right? You can't be starry-eyed about it. You have to be honest. You have to have that criticality of understanding how do you help prepare the student for the world that they live in right now. And what is the reality of that? How do you keep them safe? How do you help them make their way through this like imperfect situation that we are in? And how do you give them the tools and the hope and the optimism and the community to transform that society, right? Whether that's introducing them to people who are doing that work, whether that's giving them the chance to do that work through a civic action project, whether that's explaining, engaging them with examples from history, and sort of the critical piece is important, and the hope and the agency is really important. You have to sort of hold both of those dualities in your head. And I think the other piece that's like part of that is, yes, civic knowledge is power, but like that power may not work right away, right? Like I think, so we do these in Massachusetts, like every 8th grade student, every high schooler does a civic action project. Those take, maybe several months at the end of the year. And like, what movement have we learned about at any point that's made any real change that has been start to finish in 3 months? Like, very, very few. And so the likelihood is like you're gonna try something and it might not work the first time or the second time, or even like you might walk away and in June say like, I tried to make this change and it didn't work. And like that's the beginning of the process, it's not the end. And sort of understanding that like civics is a long game. And sort of how do you maintain the fire so that you get it for the long game.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruben. Adam, do you want to add anything?
I'm gonna then capture the first part of the question. I liked your phrase about in a changing environment and like how do you keep relevant? And so just reminded me of our approach right now is just annually we're talking with folks and saying, what do you want to learn as students and teachers? Or not what do you learn, but what do you want to engage in? What do you want to explore? And what we've noticed, I brought up the immigration example, not anticipating this comment, but what we're noticing is next year, immigration is what the vast majority of folks want to talk about, in part because it feels like it's, well, where's the safe space to talk about this, and how are we going to frame it, and what are we going to talk about, and so there's something about the construct of, working through a policy and these key decision moments that we've kind of, I don't want to say stumbled into, because my director of education would probably kick me under the table, but we've found a way to have a conversation about issues that are kind of hot topics right now by just lifting up the hood and saying, here's the policy conversations happening right now, where are you on that, and what's going into the thought, and so it's kind of creating that space for it. And that's going to change every semester, every year, to stay relevant.
Thank you so much. Let's thank our folks before we go into questions.